Welcome back to Eggs, the podcast, where we feature the best and brightest minds in business leadership, entrepreneurship, and technology. Today, we have a very special guest, Bassem Dghaidi. Bassem has over 15 years of experience in tech and is currently working on building the next generation of GitHub Actions. He is a thought leader, engineering manager, and startup founder who's advised some of the largest enterprises in delivering their engineering vision and strategy, optimizing their software development lifecycle, and adopting DevOps best practices. Bassem is also the founder of glich.stream, a platform he uses to share software engineering insights from his broad range of engineering experience. Let's dive into Bassem's insights on code, system design, engineering management, and more. Join us in welcoming to the show, Bassem Dghaidi. Hey, Bassem, how are you?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Sorry if I butchered your name. I did my best, but I don't have a lot of exposure to Lebanese last names, so I did my best.
It's a tricky one, even for the Lebanese folks. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
What's the correct pronunciation? Did he get it?
Dghaidi.
Oh, okay.
See, there's all those extra sounds in them.
So why don't you give us a brief overview of your work history, who you are, and what you do?
Sure. So again, you mentioned it. My name is Bassem. I identify as a software engineer. I've been writing code since I was like about 12 years old. So I started professionally writing code when I was about 15. I don't know, for some reason, programming just took over my brain, and it was something I enjoyed doing and I wanted to do for a long time. I've worked in different types of companies. I used to hop a lot because I figured out early on that just switching jobs often allowed me to explore different boundaries of the domain, allowed me to expand my horizon, learn much more, and sort of focus on programming as using it as a tool, as a means to an end, as opposed to it being, the fundamental. It's always an anchor, but I always use it as a tool to do more. I've taken on jobs as software engineer in digital agencies. I've worked in management consulting. I've done some work as an engineering manager for a brief period of time. Before moving to the Netherlands, I also helped found a software engineering bootcamp where I taught software engineering for about 3-4 years. Helped software engineers or fresh computer science and engineering graduates get up to speed on what the market needs. And we help them engage with the market and be able to find opportunities for them to join startups and companies. And then after I moved to the Netherlands, I also worked as a consultant. And recently now I'm at GitHub, where I've worked with our consulting arm for a bit before deciding that I want to go back to my engineering roots. And now I'm working on the GitHub Actions team, and we have a number of initiatives we're focusing on.
That's actually how I came across you and your YouTube channel, was learning how to use GitHub Actions. I had a potential job opportunity doing that, and I spent a solid month just going through trying to figure everything out about GitHub Actions and CI/CD pipelines. So thank you for creating that content and helping a novice like myself out. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. My pleasure. And I'm very happy to hear feedback. When we create content, it's like we create it, we drop it in the wild. We really don't know how it's impacting people. And then we hear awesome stories like this, and it's just very nice to hear it. And very nice to get this feedback. It's definitely encouraging to keep going and creating more content like that.
Yeah. As a young developer, how did you start to learn to code? Were you just self-taught entirely, or did you use tools like YouTube or other content creators to start to learn some of that material? How did you become adept?
It's funny. So I was born in 1989, which means that by the time I was 12 years old, I don't know about YouTube, whether it was a thing. And where I was from, bandwidth was a big deal. We were still in the dial-up times. So how I learned programming was through looking up tutorials online. So I didn't even have a computer at home. It's funny. I had to go to these net cafes, if you remember them, and just book an hour or two, right? And just go there, spend time trying to research as much as possible, learn as much as possible, experiment as much as possible, until the point where I got my first computer as a gift from my uncle. And then because I didn't have internet at home, it was quite expensive. I used to still go to these net cafes, download as many files as I can, and then take them back home and study and explore more and more. Obviously, when you're quite young, you don't really know what you're doing. So you're just tinkering, you're just trying to make things work. You don't understand the fundamentals, you don't understand how things work under the hood. And then I started joining some communities online where IRC was a big thing back then, right? So you just join a network, you join channels, different topics. And then there are a lot of awesome people who are willing to mentor you, guide you, share with you some information. So my journey through programming was just accumulating small tidbits from here and there and try to formulate an idea. And this is great because it exposes me to a lot of different problems that I had to learn how to solve myself. That accelerated my learning until I got to a point where I was able to do that professionally and get paid for it from a young age. And by doing that, I was able to afford buying my own equipment, buying my internet, so on and so forth. And that's why I still see programming until this day. That shaped my vision about programming as a means to an end, as opposed to it being the end itself. I still enjoy programming a lot, quite passionate about it, but I look at it as a tool to do other stuff, awesome stuff.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. You mentioned your age. One of the observations that I've made, I'm a little bit older than you. I was born in 1980. And so, I got my first computer and everything about the same time as you, but I've always had this theory that for people that are sort of our age group, which is people that sort of lived kind of just at the dawn of the internet and worked through to where we are presently, that there's some unique advantage in having seen the initial architecture and the construction and the way that all these languages formulated and why we built the next language and the next language and the next language versus, maybe somebody who comes into development today who, now has all these frameworks already in place and they just have to, brush up on their skills. Do you see sort of your way of doing it as an advantage, or do you think kids today or young developers on the rise have an opportunity that's somehow better than what we had?
It's funny that we're getting into this conversation because I feel old when I look at how the youngsters right now are learning programming, and I'm like, on the one hand, I envy them because they have all these awesome resources that they weren't accessible to me. But on the other hand, I'm like this old guy shouting at the screen, no, this is not how you do it. You have to learn the fundamentals first, right? You don't start with, HTML, CSS. You don't build a mobile app before learning what happens on the hardware level. You need to understand what bits are and the bytes and how the compiler works and the operating system and all of that stuff, right? But in my opinion, there's really no right and wrong in this. And fundamentally, we all go through the same journey and let me put it this way, we all go through the same topics. However, getting through these topics is different, right? So whether you start from the very tail end and you make your way back to the fundamentals, or you start from the fundamentals and you get to the shiny, sexy stuff, right? Which everybody wants to do right now, build a company, start a mobile app, so on and so forth. It doesn't matter. As long as your coverage is high, as long as you touch these topics, you're good to go. That's my opinion on it right now. When I started my bootcamp, I built a very concrete curriculum that was project-based. So it was more like project-driven development as opposed to starting with the boring stuff. I wanted my students to be able to build things, to have small wins, small incremental wins every week, to learn the fundamental topics by implementing them, and to have a why behind what they should learn. So oftentimes schooling and education, they throw at you topics. You should learn this, you should learn that, but nobody gives you a motivation for why you should go through this. Why should you learn this? And I think that's very critical to the learning of everyone today. And I think one of the biggest challenges and hurdles for learners is to build a concrete learning plan. That's a difficulty. There's a lot of topics out there, and people have a difficulty on identifying what they need to learn because they have time constraints, because they have maybe resource constraints, so on and so forth.
I can really relate to that. As someone who's been self-taught, and I'm still very novice. I'm probably a lot further along than I think I am, but I getting 2-3 years ago, getting into this, I helped out with the project where I was kind of like the in between the client and the actual developer, and the developer was very flaky. And because of that, I ended up having to seeding the database with 8,000 records from a spreadsheet that I had to manually go in and enter. And then I started learning PHP and SQL and stuff, just in the offhand chance that I would have to come in and kind of try and fix this nightmare of a project that we got into. And because of that experience, I realized that actually I really kind of enjoy this. This is something that I could see myself doing. And I started just watching YouTube tutorials and trying to put all the pieces together. And you have something that you've put together called the knowledge graph or a mind map. And I tell you what, I wish I would have had that 3 years ago, because I would have known what to study and in what order and why I should study this and instead of that. And still to this day, I'll be neck deep in something and then realize there's a tool out there that can do it for me that I had no idea about. But because I'm working on pagination for an API, now I know what React Query is because I had to go and figure it out. So thank you for putting your knowledge out there for people and creating stuff like this knowledge graph. As I mentioned, I wish I would have known about it a long time ago. So
it's my pleasure. It took me so many years to get to this understanding. So learning how to learn is a skill that many people don't recognize that it's important early on. And unfortunately, the way our educational systems are designed, someone comes in and they just throw information at you, while learning how to identify what information to learn and how to look it up and how to dive deep into the topics, just the way things did it before. Before these massive scale educational systems came into place, people were just exploring. They were jumping from one thing to another, right? And I think that's the fun in learning. And I want to bring it back in some ways to my audience, at least.
No, I think that's right. And I think that there's a lot of ground to be made up in the way that we teach this stuff. And I think the traditional education system is going to be out of step just by virtue of the fact that it takes so long to get things through a system that, by the time they're teaching it, it's already irrelevant or it's getting on out of date, And so I think that what you're talking about, though, this idea of identifying a why or understanding your education plan, and maybe we can expand on that education plan concept a little bit more, is it's easy to be passionate about something when you're problem solving, right? So like Mike's describing, he had a problem to solve. And so he had to go through the journey of trying to solve it, right? It's not unlike climbing a mountain. You have to find the right way, or you have to do whatever, you have to navigate this log, or you have to jump over this stream, and that's the fun of it, right? Ultimately, yes, you want to solve this thing, but by going through this journey and navigating that stuff, that's really where you find the joy in it. And I think that's where you decide you might really like this as a career versus, in a classroom setting where you're just, okay, well, read the text and, this is all the information at once. So good luck. I just don't think that encourages people to be passionate about their work.
100%. That's what I find fun about programming in general, is that, first of all, what I learned is there's really no end to this. So no matter how much time you spend building systems, getting experience here and there, the field just keeps on giving. There's always a new set of parameters that create a completely unique environment and a completely unique problem to solve, right? So if you're the type of person who wants to feel like, okay, I'm done, that's it, I mastered my field, that's never going to happen with programming and software engineering in general. So let's get this idea out of our minds as a beginning. So we have to first be used to the idea that this is an endless pit that you're never going to see the bottom of, which is fantastic. And if you like problem solving and dealing with different types of puzzles, you like investigative work, you like dealing with challenges, all of that stuff, this field is fantastic for this. And that's why I say acquiring the skills to learn how to investigate, learn how to build a learning plan is important, because you're going to have to do it over and over and over again. This field requires upskilling like no other field I've seen. It's very easy for us to become obsolete and our knowledge to become obsolete in the tech scene. Every new day, there's a new technology stack that's being used somewhere, that someone's inventing, that someone's putting in production somewhere. And it's very easy to for new technology to disrupt the way we do things. Right now, CoPilot is in place. It deals with a big amount of code generation for you. Now we have to sort of transition our way of thinking, how we program, so that we can master this new tool that was literally thrown into our lap. We didn't really bring it in. It's just like it's sort of out there. And if you don't use it, you're going to fall behind. So you sort of have to you have to adapt very quickly. You have to learn it. So this field is is endless. And we have to be comfortable with that idea for us to be successful in it.
So let's talk a little bit about that, actually. For those who don't know, GitHub, where you work, is essentially, it's like a library. You go to the library, you check out the code, you make changes to the code, and you check it back in when you're done, and it kind of stores the code and allows people to work on a large project together. And it's a repository for your code. And CoPilot is a new thing that came out from GitHub, where essentially it's almost like an autocomplete for, as you're typing, it'll kind of like think about what you're typing and like, oh, hey, you're trying to do this. And they'll give you a block of code, and you can literally just hit the tab button and it'll fill it out for you and get it at least 90% of the way there. You might have to make a few minor changes. And that, to me, as someone who is kind of entry level and up and coming, I would spend a long time just, okay, how do I create this function? And to have it kind of just like do it and get me 90% of the way there, it has made it so much easier to kind of just get up and running. But at the same time, I kind of feel like it might be a crutch for entry level guys like me, that could actually maybe hinder us a little bit, not necessarily going through the steps that you had to go through, memorizing certain things and knowing how, I need to do this instead of that. Can you maybe talk about CoPilot and the changes between the first version and what just launched with CoPilot X?
For sure. So CoPilot I think it's going to be remembered as the tool that that started the era of AI assisted coding. And I think with the introduction of large language models and the work that OpenAI did, and how much they brought transformer architecture, and they made something so sort of magical in a way, out of it. CoPilot is an adaptation of that, and it's focused more on the code as opposed to generating like English text or any other language text. And I think CoPilot is, as you mentioned, a tool that can assist you with solving different programming problems, let's put it that way, from a very general standpoint. And it can help you write code faster. It can take on some of the menial work that you have to do as a developer, because there are different categories of problems that we solve as developers. There's the problem solving, the difficult ones, the algorithmic thinking, structuring. You might need to think in terms of abstractions. You might think you need to restructure your code in a certain way. You need to design your code in a certain way. But there's also the aspect of writing the code, which sometimes becomes a bit redundant and boring, mm-hmm. and there are some, less important activities. I like to think of AI-assisted coding as the tool that can help me take care of the boring aspects of programming, so that I can focus on the more important stuff. Like, how can I design my system? How can I architect it in a way that can do what it's supposed to do? How can I design it for scale? These things, currently, the AI tools are not able to solve. So anything that requires some design, architecture, AI tools cannot help with. Anything that is more of the same, these AI tools are fantastic for. So CoPilot can help you with a lot of this. And the first generation of it was built on the Codex model, which had its limitations in terms of how much context it can understand. So for it to be able to spit out some useful code for you, it has to understand what it's working in. So the environment that it's running in, the code you've written before, and potentially what you want to write in a bit, right? So that it can give you a suggestion that is meaningful. That context is limited. How much context it can absorb is limited in nature. With the new generation that's coming in right now, CoPilot X, we expanded the capabilities of CoPilot, so that it uses the GPT-4 model that was released by OpenAI, which has the capacity to generate, to first of all, to crunch a lot more context. So it can absorb more code from your code base, which means it can derive more or better outcomes or outputs. The model is trained on a much larger code base, so it has seen a lot already, which makes the suggestions so much better. And then we improved how Copilot integrates with your text editor, or your IDE in this case, VS Code, which gives you also a chat window, for example. So you have Copilot Chat. If you have a question, you can ask it directly. The best use cases for it. Yeah. I find this fascinating. Why? Because imagine you're working on a piece of code and you run it and it spits out an error. But this error is the first time you've seen it. You can either take this error and try to Google it, right? And look it up. You'll probably spend like 20 minutes, half an hour, or 5 minutes if you're lucky. But most of the time you go on these rabbit holes because you cannot find the answer to your problem. Or you can feed this error to Copilot Chat and tell it, what is this error? What does it mean? And then see what it spits out. 80% of the time, again, anecdotal, I don't have the statistics, but from my experience with it, it will say something that is extremely useful and it solves my problem right away. 20% of the time, it spits out something completely irrelevant and then I have to go do the digging. But imagine how much time I saved by just getting the result in the best case scenario, right?
So I've been down both roads. When I first started, this wasn't a thing, and I'd do the Google search and I'd find, 80 different articles on, like this could be the problem, this could be the problem, and then you go down the rabbit hole and you finally figure it out. And then I went to ChatGPT and I would copy and paste my code and ask, why am I getting this error? And then it would, after a few back and forth, usually I could figure it out. Now, knowing that you have a chat feature built in, I haven't seen this. I'm going to have to go. I actually subscribe to CoPilot, and so now I'm going to have to go and update and see if I can play around with that. But that sounds really cool. Like just the ability to have the back and forth and be able to debug in a much more efficient way. That's really neat.
100%. You can also tell it, like, explain this code chunk for me. And because it's not ChatGPT in the sense that for ChatGPT, for it to give you relevant results, you need to feed it the context. But Copilot Chat is integrated already with your code, so it can already derive the context. So even if you ask it like a very simple prompt, it would be able to give you a much better suggestion than ChatGPT because it's already aware of what you're doing, where this prompt is coming from. It can predict sort of what you're going to ask it, right? So it gives you a more relevant answer. And again, Copilot X is just the vision of GitHub when it comes to AI assisted programming. It has a lot of other components. So Copilot Chat is one of them. There's also Copilot for pull requests. There's also Copilot for CLI tools. So if you want to run some Linux commands and you don't know how to do that, you can just tell it what you want to do in English, and it can translate that for you to commands, and that you can just run.
That's crazy.
And there are other elements to it as well. Copilot for docs, which it can read a lot of documentation for you, and then you can ask questions about the documentation you fed it, and you get more relevant responses.
That's so
amazing. Yeah, I wonder if we can maybe kind of keep this kind of AI conversation going, because we began our conversation talking about sort of the importance of fundamentals and having a why and all this stuff. And I know that AI is really scary for a lot of people, but I wonder if we could talk about the future of the role of the engineer, because like the way I see the GPT tools right now and the AI tools right now is they sort of require that you have some contextual knowledge of what you're doing, right? Like I, as a novice programmer, could probably not sit down and ask the right questions or put in the right code to come, sort of build something from scratch without any fundamental background. But the GPT tools will get better. They're going to be able to do a lot of the coding for you down the road, and maybe they already can. And so at some point, the role of the, senior developer, that knowledge that's in that person's head might become less and less relevant, because now all of a sudden we need this. So what is the role of that senior developer going to become? Is it more management? Are we going to be teaching kids how to use these tools? Is it just higher level problem solving and just trying to stay ahead of the GPT? But I think at some point we're going to get run out. So how do these roles evolve in a way that we can live with the thing instead of trying to rage against it?
Rage against the machine.
So I'm going to share my personal opinion on this, and it doesn't represent my employer in any way. I have to say this stuff. I'm just sharing my personal take on it. I feel that the current fear of AI assisted programming is unwarranted just because I've been using these tools since when they first came out. And as an insider, we get access to these before they hit the market, and we get to play around with them for a pretty extended period of time. So right now I've been exposed to these tools for about a year and a half almost. And I understand the limitations quite well. I know what they are really good at, and I know what they cannot do. And what I can tell you is people underestimate, for you to be able to craft a prompt that solves your exact problem, people underestimate the amount of knowledge you need to be able to say the right things for these tools to spit out exactly what solves the problem. This knowledge is like the accumulation of years of experience in this industry for you to be able to formulate the problem and shrink it to this small prompt that you feed it, right? That will never go away. That type of thing is never gonna disappear. Now people talk about, okay, we have auto GPT, where you give it a problem and then it sort of optimizes itself and keeps on generating prompts and asking itself question until it gets to the target. So you can say, for example, build this mobile app that does this. And then auto GPT will start prompting itself until it achieves the desired outcome. This is the new rave right now. But still, people see one demo where this is actually working, but they don't see the 100 other demos where this goes completely loose and it starts optimizing in the completely wrong direction. Because it could pick up a thread and just start going on that tangent that is completely irrelevant to the end goal, and it will never converge back to the problem you're initially trying to solve, which is building the app, right? There's always going to be a need for an engineer who will steer these tools in the right direction. The only thing that's going to happen, at least in the near term, until we start building some form of AGI, a real AGI, artificial general intelligence, is we can just have these tools do the boring work for us while we focus on the design, the architecture, so on and so forth. Now, it is a reality that we're going to be 5, 6, 7, 10 times more productive. That's sure. And what will happen with that is instead of needing 5 engineers to do some type of work, we're going to be needing less engineers. However, we keep forgetting that until today, we had a big shortage of software engineers. And the reason why software engineers were getting paid these gigantic salaries, at least in the US, is because we had a massive shortage of engineers. So if we are equipping engineers to do more right now, we might be able to cope with the current demand for tech. Or the way I see it, we're just going to create new use cases. We're going to just be able to expand our horizon, build more, build better, build at an even bigger scale, solve more interesting problems because we became more efficient. It doesn't always have to become a zero-sum game as we always like to make it. And I'm not really sure why it always turns out into this fear-mongering before we really start playing with these tools and integrating these tools in our way of life. And I can understand that some people might be afraid. Why are some companies making these decisions for us? Why aren't we involved in the decision-making process? Why aren't we even involved in the conversation, so on and so forth? And I think that's merited. And I think these conversations we should have had them a long time ago. But it took a catalyst like OpenAI and this type of stuff to trigger this conversation. And I think it's essential that we have this conversation, and it's essential that we regulate this technology because it's going to impact our lives, whether we like it or not. It's going to change how people learn, how our children at schools learn, how we evolve, how we consume material and information, how productive we are. And it's going to make some jobs redundant while other jobs are going to be even more in demand. So I think the conversations are important, but I don't think these tools are going to replace anyone. I think it's just going to make us more productive, and we're going to be able to do much more with less.
Yeah,
I think
you're right.
I think you nailed it as far as my thoughts on it exactly. When it first came out, you'd jump on a YouTube video and you'd see someone, hey, make me a tic-tac-toe game, and Chat GPT would just spit it out, and here you go, you got a tic-tac-toe game, and it works, it's great. Yeah, it's going to replace us. Oh no, but a tic-tac-toe game and a fully functioning app are two completely different things, and telling it exactly what you need and how you need to do it, you need someone that has been through the education process of learning how to do everything and be able to feed it the right questions. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, my wife teaches in a junior high school, and obviously in the education system, this GPT stuff has become really scary, right? Because it's very easy for these kids to just go ask it for an essay. But to your point, like what I was explaining to my wife, I was like, the problem is there's still a dependency on that student to understand what they're asking it. And so the example we used, my son was writing a paper on Macbeth. And so we said, hey, and what it was something like tying the story of Macbeth to sort of modern times and looking for examples of people fighting for power in the same ways, or something like this. And so we asked GPT for some bullet points. We asked it to put together an essay based on this, and cite some examples and all this kind of thing. And it put together a pretty good paper. Well, if my son looked at that paper, he wouldn't have had the context on Macbeth to read through it and know that what it was saying was right. The problem with GPT that I've found so far is that it's extremely confident, whether it's right or wrong. And so whatever it's telling you, if you don't have the background knowledge to understand if what it's telling you is accurate, you could easily be duped into thinking it's very smart. And man, this thing wrote an awesome paper. But when you start to dig into it, that's where that deeper knowledge goes. So to your point, if you tried to ask this thing to just create you a web app with no deeper knowledge, it would be really easy for you to not use the right word, or to not understand the output, or, whatever. And so I really look at the GPT stuff as, or these AI tools as just that, as tools. They're the latest iteration. I work in marketing and advertising, and I have a background in design and graphic design, illustration, things like that. And a lot of, designers are threatened by, things like Midjourney and DALL-E 2 and these different things, because they can create assets for them. They basically can do the job, and or in some capacities can do the job. And so I think people are really afraid of them. But I think we have this over assumption of the adoption of technology. And when you're really into these AI tools or whatever, you sort of assume everybody is. But I think that just like any new and burgeoning technology, for the people who are in on it now, you'll be the guy who's the AI coach down the road, who's, got the background knowledge to make sure it's doing the right thing, who knows how to write the right prompts, who knows how to do whatever. When the next generation of people come through and they can't figure out how to make the GPT, or Midjourney or whatever, produce the output they want. So I think that, using it as a tool, just like Photoshop, or just like for you guys, a tool like GitHub, it's AI will be an integral part of the technology, but it's just one more arrow in the quiver, so to speak.
100%. I only look at it as a tool, and it's not always useful. Like, there are a lot of occasions where, okay, Copilot, now sit, let me do my thing, because what you're spitting out is nonsense. It doesn't make sense to my case. Yeah. And at the same time, the problems I deal with on a day-to-day basis with my team, you know how much code I write on a day-to-day basis as opposed to the other activities that I have to do? Probably 20% of my day is writing code. 80% of my day is solving other problems that allow me to write that 20% of code. So when people say we're going to replace software engineers, who's going to deal with all of the communication between the different teams in the organization? Who's going to deal with the design work? Who's going to deal with people who write the documentation? Who's going to deal with the folks who are going to take us to market? Who's going to deal with the business strategy? Who's going to deal with the product owners? I don't think that ChatGPT or AutoGPT or whatever it is going to do all of this work for us. Well, so we're not there yet.
Yeah. And I think too that, not all AI tools are created equally either. And so like the example that I just ran into, I decided to try and use it for a design project I had. It was creating a poster for a May the 4th and Cinco de Mayo thing kind of put together, right? So a Star Wars themed Cinco de Mayo, basically. And so, and they had a really low budget. They didn't want to pay me to do a real illustration and take the time to create something and concept out some stuff. They're just like, we just need a flyer we can hang on the wall, quick and easy. So I went to Midjourney and I went to DALL-E, and I prompted both of them with the same thing, which is basically, give me like Yoda with, traditional Mexican garb and, Mexican food and all this stuff around. And the output I got from DALL-E was horrific. Like, I mean, it's the stuff of nightmares. And then the stuff I got from Midjourney was really strong. Like it looked great, and so I was able to come up with this cute little picture of Yoda, with all his taco stuff around, and it was awesome. So, I mean, so it was a really cool application of that technology. It saved me a ton of time, and the output was good, right? So as a design person or somebody who's selling a design asset, that was great. It's a really good tool. Another example, just for the same client, actually, I was doing or needed stock photography. So I was able to go to Midjourney instead and tell it what I wanted in a stock photo. And with the right range of prompts, I was able to generate the photo that I wanted instead of spending hours shopping some stock photo site. So I mean, so I can see that there's a lot of practical uses for these things, but I can also see, just between those two tools, for example, I mean, where Midjourney is at versus where DALL-E is at, like, it's not there. Like they're just not even the same thing.
It's a world of difference. Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot can go into the design of these tools, and there are a lot of tweaks and a lot of optimizations that you can do. And without getting too much into the technicalities, there's a secret sauce that can come into play that allows you to have this better yield on one tool rather than the other. And it's very important the data you train the tool on, right? So there's a lot of controversy about Midjourney, for example, that it's sort of ripping off other artists' work. This thing it's able to generate, it's not really coming out of the blue. It's been trained on other people's material in a way, right? That a human being cannot really do itself. And that's also one of the big debates that are currently being had. Would these models be as performant as they were without building on top of the creations of other human beings, or like even the total of humanity to a certain extent, right? And that's a very valid question to be asked at this point in time.
Well, and it might be interesting to just explore that quickly if you've got a minute. Just it hit the news today that Grimes, who's a singer, and she's always been really forward thinking on NFTs and all this other technology, she's basically said that she'll split royalties with anybody creating music with her voice in AI. This is off the heels of some Drake song with The Weeknd that was totally fabricated in AI that, went viral and all this stuff, and they had nothing to do with it. And so it creates a really interesting point. So to your point about Midjourney, basically scrubbing the world's art and then, using that as its knowledge base, how do you think that ends up? I mean, even code to some example, or to some extent, there are standardizations, but some people wrote that stuff. Like that code was designed by somebody, and now we're doing our own thing with it. Or in the world of music, we're using your sound or your voice or your likeness to do whatever. So like, where are the lines, do you think? What are your opinions?
The thing is, I don't have the answers, honestly. And I think about these things all the time. I think these tools are inevitable in a way. And it's sort of the accumulation of the entirety of humanity's progress. Mm-hmm. So this is the summation of all of our work as a humanity in a way, right? The ability for these tools to be able to even crunch this amount of data. It's not about the GPUs they use and all of that stuff. These tools and the models, these tools without the what we created as humans mean absolutely nothing. They can generate nothing, right? Now the question becomes, I think Grimes is smart in the sense that she knows that it's inevitable, that someone's going to rip off or use her voice or whatever in the future to create anything. And before she can start fighting it, because I think that's going to be a losing game, it's always going to be a leaky problem, she figure out a smarter way where she can split the profit and just let's preemptively anticipate this move and let's figure out how I can profit from it. And I think all of the creators should start thinking along these lines. The main problem I can think of is how do you control it, right? And I've been playing with the idea of maybe crypto coming into play, where we have some extremely microtransactions that can come into the game over here. I'm not a big advocate of crypto. I don't like the concept at all. But I think the idea of having minute or small microtransactions happening at very quick speeds and with very small fees will be important for this type of stuff to actually work down the line, where every time you make a generate something using someone's voice or whatever, a small fee is immediately deducted or paid or whatever, and then it's immediately transferred.
Yeah, it's
I
interesting that
think we're
that
going to
you say
need
that.
an internet currency.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that you say that, because like I've long been contemplating ways to use blockchain technology for asset protection, right? Some way of tracking a ostensibly an NFT as it moves around the internet, so that basically you could get paid on your rights, right? I mean, if you created something and you have sort of this digital ownership, is there a way to track that thing across the internet, right? And so I think it's interesting that you two landed on sort of the idea of a crypto exchange or something, basically to commemorate these transactions or these things that are happening. And I think you're right that some type of technology is going to be the solution. But it's funny because I was having this discussion in my own head about, the copyright implications and, stealing somebody's likeness. I mean, there's all kinds of examples of this already. They're sticking Joe Rogan in commercials, and they're doing, all these guys in ads that are not agreeing to doing the ads. And so, I mean, there's all kinds of this stuff, and they hide behind shell corporations and all that stuff. And I think you're right that it's inevitable that this kind of stuff will happen. I would also argue that it's always happened.
Yeah.
Whether I mean, we might be able to do it better now, but I mean, people always ripped off people. They stole artwork, or they traced a design, or they did whatever. I mean, this is like something as old as time. It feels new, but it's old. And so, but I would argue too that from a collective knowledge of the world standpoint, that basically this is how we do everything. We all learn from one another, right? The way that I draw or paint or whatever might be influenced by some artist that I saw that I liked, or some piece of work that I did, or the music I might make might be derivative of, some old musician that I really liked, or, a previous generation rapper or whatever, I mean, I'm getting old, so it all sounds the same to me nowadays, but
just look at Greta Van Fleet. Who did they rip off?
Yeah, they sound exactly like Led Zeppelin.
So, and I would say that every musician, every artist, every even software developers, whatever it is that you're doing, I would say that someone somewhere has had an influence on that person, and they're not necessarily just taking it and ripping it off directly, but they're taking little pieces here and there. And they're, look at all the records on my wall. Look at, like me as a DJ, I'll take samples from here and samples from there, and I'll create little cool things. And voila, I've got a new product, but it's pulled from here, pulled from there, pulled from here, pulled from there. And, whether it's, GitHub Copilot, pulling from open repos, the public repos, and using existing code sources that are out there to help you finish, whatever it is. I think it's totally fine. I don't see any downside to it. If anything, it's a major win for everyone involved. So I don't know. Did I slaughter that?
I think we can get pretty philosophical about this, but I think that fundamentally the issue in my mind is as follows. If we were all able to have a comfortable living, if we were all able to not worry about survival as human beings, if we were all financially safe, right, it wouldn't matter if somebody used our productions or whatever. I feel like if we get to that stage, we'll be able to just create, put it out there for people to use, for people to benefit from it, without worrying about accumulation of wealth and the concentration of indefinite, amounts of money that we're never going to be able to spend in anyone's lifetime. And I'm not necessarily anti-capitalist, but I think this concentration of wealth in a limited amount of people in the world is at the root cause of a lot of the friction that we see on a day-to-day basis. The lack of a proper distribution of wealth. These tools should not be created to move huge amounts of money from people's pockets and concentrate them with the very few. These tools should improve humanity overall.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be quite utopic, but I feel like we need to make a major paradigm shift and have a major change in how we look at things as human beings. We're blessed with these awesome creations and having the ability to create these things. We need to start thinking about our fundamental societal structures and economic structures. And technology is not going to save us from everything. We have to really rethink how we behave as human beings and how we work with each other. And I think that's fundamentally what needs to happen and down the line. And I hope we get to a point where we can start tackling these problems.
Yeah, and I might just add too, like in the spirit of, people who are afraid that their IP is being stolen or whatever. I mean, there's always going to be a spot for sort of the hardest workers or the people who put in the most energy or, the people who are the most charismatic or whatever. Not even so much as it pertains to wealth and things like that, but just like, if you go out and work hard, you'll develop a reputation around your people, right? Whoever your audience is, whether that's your local community or whatever, right? I mean, if you're the guy who gives the most to the youth sports program in terms of time and energy and that sort of thing, that's how you'll be known, right? In your community where it matters. It doesn't matter as much about being big and famous or whatever, right? So if you're creating artwork that people love, I mean, it does get muddy with the capitalistic aspect, which is just, if I'm selling Grimes' album as my own, then of course, we start getting into some fuzzy territory because those people should be allowed to perform their art too. But I do think that there's always going to be opportunity for the people who are willing to earn it. And then the other sort of dichotomy that I always counter with when we talk about things that are technological is that there are parts of the world where having AI just literally doesn't matter. Like this isn't where they're at, right? And there are pieces, I always make a joke about, finding some unknown continent and then taking the toaster oven there and, becoming the inventor of the toaster on some little island and just, bringing toasters to the world. But the idea is basically that, okay, so we're talking, the technology we're talking about, it is present, but it is also future technology. And for so many people, that's just not even where we're at yet. So it's like, we're playing this game, but other people aren't even playing it
yet. Yeah.
100%. Agree.
I
agree. I come from a.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to double down and say that I come from a tiny town in Lebanon, and for my mom, it's extremely difficult to explain what I do and all of this tech stuff that I work on, right? So yeah, this is not even on their radar, everything we're discussing today.
Yeah. And I do think that, as a global society, I hope that these technologies do improve things and maybe move these parts of the world that are maybe behind technologically forward more quickly. Maybe they get to skip a couple steps in sort of their industrialization or whatever, so that they don't have to, they go from, I don't know, burning fossil fuels or dung or something to, right into electronic technologies or solar or something, instead of having to figure it out themselves because this technology exists. So hopefully it will benefit everybody. But I think that there's a lot to be said too for, we live in this bubble and not everybody's here yet.
Yeah. This has been a great conversation. I was wondering if maybe we could kind of pivot a little bit and talk about up and coming software developers like myself and getting your first role and getting your first foot in the door. And when you get that first foot in the door, what kind of changes come into place working in a team environment on a software project and things that like maybe your first role in software and what changed from being, just someone who's passionate about it to actually doing it for a day-to-day job? What kind of things change and what kind of things do you need to be aware of in working with a group?
It's a big and very important question. It's also the backbone of my bootcamp that I helped design. And the element that I think is the backbone of doing this jump from an amateur to a professional is the soft skills. Mm-hmm. And every techie thinks that, no, it's the accumulation of technical knowledge. It's not. What's going to make you a professional software engineer are the soft skills, the array of soft skills that you need to acquire. This is the most difficult part. And this is the thing that takes a lot of engineers a lot of time to master because they think it's not important. So having mastered the fundamentals is important. Sure, if you're joining a web development company, you need to learn how to do web development, back-end development. You need to learn maybe a framework or two. You need to learn a programming language. You need to learn a bit about the front end, how it works, whether you're building for the web or mobile, doesn't matter. You need to learn a source control solution, so how to collaborate with other engineers. You need to learn a little bit about how you can store that code somewhere safe. You need to learn about how to also publish that code in a way that is sort of automated to a certain extent. And you need to learn a little bit more about security. These are the fundamentals, right? Once you master those, the rest is how to deal with people. How can I communicate? How can I get the group to converge towards a common objective? How can I rally people around my technical idea? How can I debate my technical idea in a way that attracts others to follow along? How can I make sure that um, um, how can I communicate to my managers, my product managers? How can I relay technical ideas in a very simple terms so that everybody I'm engaging with who's non-technical can understand the trade-offs that need to be made? Because one of the biggest constants in software engineering is you cannot solve for everything. Software engineering is more of an optimization problem than it is a solving a function problem. So in math, for example, you get a certain problem, you do put in some input, and then you get some output. And people think that software engineering is like that. You put in some input, and your brain needs to do something, and then you need to spit out the solution. It's not like that. Programming is more of a trial and error, optimizing, changing things gradually until you get to the point where you need to get to. And learning this as early as possible and understanding this small thing is very important for you to be a good software engineer. And that's going to be the distinction between good engineers and engineers who are going to be low performers, in my opinion. The technical, it's inevitable. You're going to need to keep on growing yourself. There's always going to be something new to learn. Don't chase the trends early on. Focus on mastering the tools that you have at hand, and then start expanding your horizon as you see fit and as new opportunities become available for you. And take your time, be patient, enjoy the journey, don't rush it. I was very in my beginnings when I started working, I was always like in a rush to get promoted, to get more responsibility, to become the team lead, to become the manager. No, spend time crafting, enjoy the time you get with the code and problem solving. You're going to get less of that in the future with more experience. You're going to have way more responsibilities that are not related to writing code, and you're going to miss that part of the job.
I wanted to ask you too, do you see like boot camps like your program, and obviously there are a lot of other programs out there, so assuming we have a great boot camp, are people prepared to actually go into the workforce after taking something like that? Like, are they at a level where they could take an entry-level job somewhere? And how do you find those? Because you mentioned earlier that there are a lot of topics to learn, right? And so, and you just mentioned, don't go after the trend. Okay, so I'm not going after the trend, but I've put together 3 or 4 different languages that I know. But I mean, can I parlay that into a job? Like, will somebody know that I'm teachable and just let me come in and learn on the job? Or like, is there some other piece that I should be creating or doing or thing I should be doing that would maybe bridge that a little better?
Okay, let's unpack it very transparently. Okay, so first of all, not all bootcamps are created equal. And the bootcamp I helped found had a very important distinction to all other bootcamps. We didn't accept anyone who didn't have a computer science or an engineering background. So our bootcamp was not to teach programming from nothing. Our bootcamp was sort of a career accelerator. It was a step between graduation and your first job, so that we can sort of crunch the first year and a half of work experience into about 14 weeks, so that by the time you join this startup, you're able to be productive from day one, startup or company or whatever. This is what employers are looking for. There's still a huge gap between what universities teach and the skills that are required by the market. Companies cannot invest in training individuals for an extended period of time. At least the companies where I was, in the market that I was in, we didn't have big tech, where you can invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in an individual until they get ramp up and get up to speed. We had to have people who are immediately, able to produce. And that was the main hypothesis behind the bootcamp, that we wanted to accelerate people to join the job market and be productive from day one. Now, the bootcamps that train someone on everything programming within 14 weeks, I think that's sort of mission impossible. Mm-hmm. And people were able to get away with it just because there was so much demand for software engineers that companies would work with pretty much anyone who had any level of experience. They will work with them to ramp them up, and they will just bite on whatever they are lacking, even though some of the skills that they are lacking are important. And it takes a lot of time. to acquire these skills. It's inevitable. Time is important. You cannot just say, I want to crunch 3 years of education into a few weeks. In my opinion, that's impossible. You can maybe do it in a year. Yeah. If you don't learn, for example, if you can take a whole curriculum of computer science, right, and shrink it to a year, maybe 6 months at the very least. Why? Because you take away everything operating systems, you take away all the database theory, you take away everything related to algorithms anything advanced in terms of algorithms. You take away anything related to discrete mathematics and all of that stuff. You focus on programming languages, algorithms, data structures, and you add to that everything related to databases and frameworks, and you can get a functioning programmer within a 6 months to a year period. And if you give them a specific set of problems to solve and projects to build, that will walk them through the important initial pitfalls of programming, where they can acquire this hands-on experience of what happens if they drop a database, what happens if they see the database in the wrong way, what happens with SQL, what happens with some of the security aspects of programming. So if you walk them through an intentional set of problems that will get them this knowledge very quickly, I think it's feasible within a few months period.
So I went through boot camp. I did a 12-week boot camp that was it was one of the ones that was designed for the teach them from the ground up, and by the end how to be a software developer kind of thing, right? And I as someone who had studied on my own beforehand, the first 5 weeks I felt was a waste of my time. And then it's all of a sudden went from a waste of my time to way over my head. And I had 4 weeks to figure out everything. And it just was crunched into, like way too short a time. And I kind of feel like I wasted my time doing it, because I think if I had the right inputs and the roadmap like you've provided to study on my own, I could have done it on my own in my own kind of learning environment and gotten more out of it, rather than trying to crunch everything into such a short amount of time and feeling overwhelmed. And then I have to go back and relearn it all, because there's no way you can just pack it all into that short amount of time. So I'm glad to hear you say that. And I really appreciate this conversation that we've had. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We've hit our hour mark, and with that, can you maybe tell people how they can get in touch with you, where they can reach out and learn more if they want to?
Yeah, definitely. So I will make it easier. All of my links, all of my social networks, all of my content, everything is in one link, glich.stream. And Glitch, I thought it would be funny to write it in a way where there's a mistake, so you don't write it in the proper way. It's GAGLICH. But that's, if you have a startup, don't come up with weird names. Just use something more standard. So if you go to glich.stream, you will find all of the links, and you can reach out to me over there.
That's great. We'll be sure to share that too, in the show notes and everything. So thanks so much for doing this. Yeah, no, this conversation has been awesome, and honestly, it could go on another half hour. I mean, there's so much to unpack here, and we didn't even cover all the bases that I had hoped to. But I'm grateful for your insights on AI and all this other sort of relevant stuff that's happening today. And I think you provide some great resources for people who are on the up and coming. So thank you for all that, and God bless on your future work.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes in the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.